Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. The 2023 Giving Report by CanadaHelps begins with a stark headline: It's time for change. The report goes on to outline alarming challenges facing the nonprofit sector, including unprecedented demand for services, falling donations, staff mental health issues and burnout, and rising inflation. We've also seen reports of a disturbing decline in public trust in the nonprofit sector and a continued reckoning of nonprofits and charities to embrace diversity and inclusion from leadership to frontline workers. To help us understand the challenges and explore solutions, please welcome Omar Visram, co-founder and CEO of Enkel Backoffice Solutions. Enkel offers technology-powered accounting processes with experienced professionals that deliver timely, reliable accounting and bookkeeping services at an affordable price for Canadian nonprofits and businesses. Welcome to the podcast, Omar.
Thank you for having me, Mary.
Well, as I mentioned, the 2023 CanadaHelps Giving Report outlines some pretty stark challenges for nonprofits, including rising service demands and costs, decreased donations and funding, a lack of volunteers, and ongoing challenges with staff retention and burnout. What are you seeing with your nonprofit clients?
So the stark reality in this data point is in the report is that 40% of nonprofits in Canada have seen a lasting increase in demand since 2020. Some other data points from this report: 22% of Canadians expect to rely on charities for basic needs, which is up 8% in 9 months. 50.8% of charities are highly concerned about staff burnout. 57.3% of charities cannot meet current levels of demand, and 31.5% of charities raised fewer funds in 2022. Organizations ultimately need to do more with the same or less amount of resources. More need, fewer dollars is the message. We see this data at a more on-the-ground level playing out with our clients. We see clients unable to scale up to serve growing demand. We see clients facing rampant staff turnover. We see clients really forced to make tough, heartbreaking decisions about programs. All of this is not very promising as we look to 2024, but I am an optimist. The silver lining, in my view, is that this is forcing organizations and leaders to rise to the occasion, focus on what they are really good at and where they can have the highest impact. That said, tough decisions never feel great.
Well, let's start talking about inflation. I mean, that is very much influencing these data points that we're seeing. Can you explain how inflation is impacting the nonprofits? Is there anything that nonprofits can do to address these issues of rising inflation?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Canadians get squeezed, they're turning to not-for-profit organizations for services. Think about the cost of food. As the cost of food rises, pressure on food banks also rises, as Canadians are less able to afford to feed their families. Similarly, the cost of housing is rising, and demand for temporary housing, social housing, shelters is on the rise. So, what can organizations do? So one, I think, and we were just speaking about this morning on a webinar that we did with Charity Village, is to focus on donations. How can you appeal to your donors from the past? It's competitive out there, and the CanadaHelps Giving Report articulates this well. But be ready to compete. Ultimately, you need to focus on strategies on how you can increase donations from current and past members that are really aligned with your overall mission and will continue to support you in good and bad times. Higher labor and other operating costs. Think about how your organization can automate. I'm having a very real conversation about this with one client where they have found that half of one person's job has been solving inefficient paper flow in the organization. That's just one example, but I come across many such examples on an ongoing basis.
Now, interest rates are, of course, also rising. Does this impact the nonprofit sector? What should nonprofit leaders know about rising interest rates and how it could influence their revenues?
So most economists agree that we're at the end of the cycle of interest rate increases. Interest rate increases are beginning to work, and we're seeing the inflation rates falling. As an example, Stats Canada released its October CPI numbers this week, and they show that inflation is down to 3.1%. Now, the 2% target of the bank that the Bank of Canada has set is we're not there yet, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. In an interview with Mark Carney that I was reading this morning, Carney notes that higher for longer is the trend. We should not expect to see interest rates come down for some time. NPO leaders need to be ready to contend with current rates for some time. So, what does that mean for not for profit organizations? Really, it's quite simply increased cost of borrowing, decreases in donations. People will have less disposable income and will be feeling more financial pressure for longer. So, what can be done? Really managing debt levels carefully, investing wisely. If you're sitting on endowments, make sure those endowments are invested to take advantage of higher yields than we've seen in years. Adapt, change, innovate, diversify, even. Think about new sources of funding that you might be able to tap into. And again, I come back to that question, can you automate, right? Are there things within the organization, are there systems or processes that can be automated to make your organization more efficient and to ultimately cut down on costs?
Now, multiple reports, including the Giving Report and your comments that we've just heard, indicate that individual donations from Canadians are on a downward trend. Can you talk about this? You mentioned focusing on donations and fundraising might be very critical for some of the nonprofits out there that might be struggling. What are some of the factors leading to this, and how can nonprofits meet the challenge?
Yes, this is a great question. And this, sort of as a theme, really stood out to me from that report, Mary. One clear trend is that the distribution of where donations is coming from is changing. Younger generations are under financial pressure due to an affordability crisis in Canada. And really, while the overall household giving participation rate has dropped by 8%, imagine that 8% from 36% to 28%, the drops are steepest amongst households with the highest income. I just found that particular stat to be quite surprising. The report points to, and I agree with this, that this raises the concern that our values towards giving and caring for communities may be changing. A counter argument, or perhaps even a parallel argument, however, is that households feel the need for more prudence given the economic uncertainty. So, what can NPOs do? Offering flexibility in donation amounts, ability to pause recurring donations, keeping supporters engaged and informed about how the organization is moving the mission forward. Also, drawing on past donors. People are still giving. Be ready, like I said, to compete for dollars. Grow the pool and attract different target audiences. One thing the report notes is that despite the declines in numbers of people in all age categories, the category of 55 plus had some meaningful growth within the cohort, and that's in dollars, not in number of people donating. Canadians aged 55 plus donated in 2020. From 2020, donations from people 55 plus were $7.1 billion, whereas in 2010 they were only $4.7 billion. I was thinking about this number, and I was thinking about my earlier experience in my career. I started my career at KPMG and worked in Canadian corporate tax planning for high net worth individuals for a number of years. And I believe that the reason that we're seeing such a sharp increase in giving from a dollars perspective in this age cohort is that high net worth individuals are thinking about their legacy in advance of their passing. Could this be an opportunity for your organization? Do you have donors in this cohort that maybe you should be tapping into? I thought this was a pretty interesting opportunity.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting opportunity and a really fascinating statistic and a surprising one. That is the first time I've heard that solution being considered, and I think that's really well considered. Now, you've talked a little bit about how we can automate certain activities to reduce costs, labor costs, and I guess be more productive and be more efficient. But
Mhm.
then we also are addressing an issue of the talent shortage and the challenge of actually attracting um, uh, potential candidates for roles within nonprofits. So they have a really nonprofits really have a tough balancing act between a difficult economic climate with creating a healthy, attractive workplace for staff at the same time. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, absolutely. So transparency and communication, of course, it's you know, I think everybody has heard this one before, but being honest about the organization's financial situation and the overall economic climate can really help to foster trust. I mean, at the end of the day, one big advantage that not-for-profit organizations have is they generally employ people that are really connected with the mission of the organization. Many of these people will be there in good and bad times to support the organization, just out of that sense of alignment on the mission. Also, consider total compensation packages, including benefits, vacation time, retirement savings, and really ensuring that the organization is competitive. I say competitive, but I think there's also an opportunity to be innovative here. Earlier in my career, in the financial crisis, one thing the company I was working for did was they had mandatory paid days off around long weekends. Nobody complained about this. It was a relatively small impact to everybody's paycheck, but everybody got an extra day off around a long weekend. And who doesn't want that? So, my point there is be innovative. In smaller organizations, talk to your staff and really understand what matters the most to them. Emphasize the importance of your work and mission. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is critical. This is an excellent way to retain and build long term loyalty with your staff. And also, recognition and appreciation, DEI initiatives, and flexible work arrangements are all very important considerations.
Now, do financial solutions, some of the services that you offer, do they play a role in solving some of these challenges? How should nonprofit leaders and boards be thinking differently about budgeting and finance, particularly during these difficult times? I guess readdressing a lot of their past practices might be a first step.
Absolutely. I think really working closely with the board to make strategic long term and short term operational plans with really worst case and best case scenario type discussions and plans. I think that's really important in times like these. Adaptability and flexibility is key. Developing plans that factor in interest rate changes, also improving operational efficiency. Look at where to save costs, increase efficiency, adopt technology, and outsource. Does that answer the question, Mary, or do you have any follow up questions there?
No, I do understand what you're saying. I guess it's an opportunity to take a look at whether there's a way of, like, for example, some of the services that you offer in regards to adapting the way in which they manage their finances, whether there's some solutions there that could be looked at for a nonprofit that may not have actually been focusing on that.
Absolutely. So we are actually having this conversation a lot with our clients and potential clients. What should the optimal finance function for your organization look like? What are the results that you're looking for, and how do you get there in the most efficient way? And often it's a combination of things. It's a combination of people, process, and technology. And so you need to look at all of those levers and how you deliver the best result and deliver the numbers that your organization needs. I think just sort of more broadly than our services, Mary, um, the whole concept of employing people to perform certain tasks that are non-core to an organization, and this applies in for-profit organizations, and I think it really applies in not-for-profit organizations. Really, there's a significant management overhead that goes into managing IT or managing an HR department within your organization. When you outsource, you really pay for an outcome. And I think that not for profit organizations have an opportunity to save money by looking at alternatives, but also this presents an opportunity for organizations to just do things better.
Now, do you see mergers or collaborations between nonprofits as a possible necessary step in today's economic climate? Is that one of the solutions that nonprofits could be looking at?
Absolutely. And I've actually seen some real life examples of this, Mary. I can't disclose names of organizations, of course. And I do actually know of a number of organizations that are having these conversations. And so I definitely see this as a trend. My personal view is that this is, and this really can be a positive thing, but I fear that maybe it's happening too slowly. There is a feeling that an organization is losing out or has lost the battle when a merger occurs or when it, you know, um, combines its operations with another. I would challenge organizations to think about the efficiency. It's simply sometimes too inefficient to remain independent. Of course, as costs have increased, you know, a very small organization has to have certain baseline of services and resources. Well, that baseline has suddenly increased, and it's increased very sharply. So the reasons we're seeing mergers, not-for-profits and charities are thinking about how to operate efficiently with increased demand for their communities, looking at opportunities for saving costs while strengthening the organization's capacity, and also mitigating risk with a collaborative structure. So when organizations come together, they can potentially benefit from each other's leadership teams, their board expertise, and this can really make the two organizations or multiple organizations combined much more strong and resilient. Of course, when considering mergers, this should always be done cautiously and really with the organization's mission at the center. So I would say don't approach this thinking that, or don't have the mindset that this is just a bad thing right off the bat, and that the good work that the organization has achieved will be lost, its mission, all of those things will be lost. But at the same time, you want to balance the sort of economic factors, the overall benefits, with the missions of the organization.
Yeah, it's interesting in the private sector. It's often it could be a takeover, but it's often a merger, and it can be a win-win to both organizations,
Absolutely.
and is often viewed that way in business. And I guess nonprofits could take that lesson to heart in thinking about whether it might be a solution to continue to operate, but in collaboration with another like-minded organization. That's
Yeah.
sort of what I think you're describing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't hurt to have these conversations, right? The mergers that I'm seeing are really often so there's a few different scenarios I've seen. In some situations, it's organizations that serve the same communities but provide slightly different scope of services. So coming together to provide together a broader scope of services. And then there are others that are, providing the same scope of services just in different geographies. And so coming together and having a larger impact overall. So there's different reasons for it, but I think I see significant opportunity for this.
And what other ways can nonprofits streamline their operations? How can this help to take pressure off staff while also reducing expenses?
So consider strategic partnerships and collaborations where you can pool resources or join efforts. Um, there are opportunities, and I've spoken to some organizations and smaller communities, for instance, where they pool their accounting resources. Right? It's one bookkeeper that's engaged to support a multitude of organizations. That's potentially one opportunity. I've also seen organizations um, outsourcing certain functions, non-core functions, to other not-for-profits. So not necessarily engaging an organization like Enkel, but actually engaging another organization that has these functions dialed and operating well. Um, so that would be my overall thought there is see how you can collaborate with other not-for-profit organizations.
And what advice do you have for organizations setting out on capital projects in the next year or two? What should organizations who are currently carrying debt think about, and how are those connected?
Yeah, so really drawing on the prevailing view that interest rates will not increase further, but that they will not decline quickly, I would urge organizations to just be cautious. Don't take on incremental debt that you cannot handle, because, of course, there's uncertainty as to how long rates will stay where they are. And that'll have a considerable impact on your organization and your ability to serve.
And I'd like to wrap up by asking you, what final piece of advice would you give nonprofit leaders as we head into 2024?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I said at the beginning, I'm an optimist. I think we've had a lot of negative data to share in this discussion. But I was thinking about recently I was thinking about a professor of mine from university who used to say that a bad economy is a great time to build a business. And I think this may, in some ways, apply to not for profit organizations. This is an opportunity to get back to your mission and really focus on the things that you do great. The environment is going to be challenging. You will have to make tough decisions, but these could be tough decisions that will make the organization stronger in the end. So that would be my takeaway is, a little bit of a positive spin to it. These will be hard times, but you absolutely can come out stronger.
Well, thank you very, very much for your insight and analysis. Your advice for nonprofit professionals in our audience is so appreciated. Thank you for joining us on Charity Village Connects.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary.
It's a great pleasure.